Good morning, everyone. My name is Emily Muraguri. I'm going to be taking you through how to sell cybersecurity to the board. I hope you've had a good start to the conference and you've had informative sessions during the morning sessions or the talks that came at least before this one. So like I've mentioned, today I'm going to be taking you through how to sell cybersecurity to the board. A little bit about myself. My name is Emily Muraguri, like I've said. I'm an information security professional with experience in web, mobile, and network security, penetration testing, user awareness, and IT audit. Currently, I work with a local bank in Nairobi, Kenya. So that's what I do as my day job. In addition to that, I like teaching robotics to children. So during the weekends, or at least when I'm free, I also teach robotics to children using the First Lego League, and I'm also a judge in the same competition. So without any further ado, I think let's get into the topic of the day because we have a lot to cover and unpack during the session. So what we will do during the session, we'll have an introduction to the topic. We'll do a case study to help us understand more on the pointers that we are going to learn during the session. And lastly, we are going to conclude the session. So an introduction, we're going to look at what is a board and what is its key role in the information security sector of any organization or any business. So what is the board? The board sits on top of an organization and it's responsible for knowing and overseeing everything in the company. The board knows the operation, the ins and outs of any company, and how the company operates and the key risks that are threatening the overall success of a company. So the board is responsible for overseeing the overall success of a company and also identifying the key threats to any company. A major risk in any organization, so at the moment right now, is the cybersecurity risk, be it a bank, be it a hospital, be it a school, because of the data that they carry, poses or is threatened by the cybersecurity risk. So like any other strategy in an organization, cybersecurity should take a top-down approach. What do I mean by that? The strategy of an organization or a business should be driven by the board of directors. They're the one who give the directive on the direction that the company should take. Like any other strategy, the cybersecurity strategy should be driven by the board such that it should have a top-down approach. It should be driven by the board and the top-level management. It cannot come from a junior employee and go up. It should come from the board and be trickled down to middle-level manager and the junior employees and so on and so forth. So a case study, XYZ Hospital has been in operation for 2 years now and has a fully fledged corporate network. The hospital also has an open Wi-Fi that guests use while visiting the hospital. There is no way yet to separate the corporate network, that is the servers, the databases that carry the customer or client information, from what the guest can access from the Wi-Fi. Having identified the risk, the Cisco requires board approval to acquire a network access system to segregate the two networks. That's the corporate network in which that carries the servers, the databases, the data of the organization, and the Wi-Fi that the customers or the clients that come to the hospital use maybe to browse the network or download documents. So how should the CISO go about it? So this is what we will use to analyze and bring out the concept of how to sell cybersecurity to the board. So I'm just going to allow like 30 seconds for you to read through the case study and internalize it. So maybe I can go through it again. XYZ Hospital has been in operation for 2 years now and has a fully fledged corporate network. The hospital has an open Wi-Fi that guests use while visiting the hospital. There is no way yet to separate the corporate network and the network in which the customers or the clients use to access the network, the internet, while visiting the hospital. The CISO has identified this as a key risk. I'm sure we all know why this is a key risk. If the Wi-Fi that the customers use to access the internet can also be used to access internal resources. So the CISO has identified this risk and requires board approval to acquire a network access control tool to segregate the two networks. So how should they go about it? So a few pointers that we will cover. The first thing is empathy and emotional connection. Do not ever underestimate the power of these two. The second thing is cyber risk and not cyber security and risk calculus. The other thing is permission to decide. The other thing is context is king, always a business perspective. You should always give context to anything that you cover. The other thing is lead and teach. The other thing is a framework. The other thing is business objectives. So these are the things that we're going to cover during the session. So on to my first point of empathy and emotional connection. The first thing is, it's very easy to lose human connection when you're talking about malware risk, ransomware, and network security. When you get into the technical jargons, it's very easy for you to forget that you're actually talking to humans and that they actually connect. You should actually connect on a human to human level with them. You should make a human connection and take the customer's perspective. Our audience does not care about maps or charts or cybersecurity statistics. You should always keep in mind that you're talking to the topmost management level of an organization. All they want to know is what is the impact of the cybersecurity risk to my organization. They care about the risk and the impacts associated if the risk is actually actualized. By concentrating only on the data metric graphs, you see all this presentation that we usually carry when we are presenting our cases to the board, you will miss the unconscious and very human element of decision making process, that is the feelings. Your audience is only interested in how you will make their world a better place for them to live in. That is, if the board is only interested in making the organization a profitable organization or a successful one. And if you put across the point that, for instance, if customer data is accessed from the public Wi-Fi, it might lead to financial penalties. The board is more often than not likely to pay attention to you when you capture that aspect of the presentation. And your audience only speaks finance with an emphasis of profit and loss, risk and reward. As a result, your story needs to be relatable to the audience that is driven by either fear, gain, or uses actual risk expressed in monetary terms, especially to communicate the future state of their world if they choose, for instance, not to acquire the network access control system, and if they choose to actually acquire it. You cannot reach the audience with data that expresses risks in terms of low, high, medium. You have to actually connect with them on a personal level and tell them if, for instance, if we do not have a network access control system, our client data might be reached and we might be subject to penalties as we have infringed some of the laws, like, for instance, the GDPR law. The other thing is brand personality in marketing. Opinions are important because they convey a sense of urgency about your story. Without an opinion, there's no passion. Opinions challenge your prospects to think. You want them to think about why you are selling them and not why you are selling them this idea and not that. So you need to give a backstory of why we need to acquire the network access control system. Instead of getting the board to sign off an additional spend because it will do this and that will prevent future malware attacks, get them to sign off an investment in the future of the company, an investment that will increase the company's brand credibility through customer safety and lead to increased revenue, customer loyalty, and profit. So the board, I'm sorry to say this, but more often than not, it cares about how much money I'm making, how is my company looking from the outside view, how are my customers viewing me. So while presenting the case, you should always make sure that you also give a connection to all those things. If my customer, for instance, if customer information is breached, of course, that will have a very adverse effect on the said company. And so there is need to acquire that network access control system. So when you put across that point in that manner, instead of just giving the technical jargons to the board of directors, you're more often than not to cut across the message to them. So you are the CISO, and thus credentials which establish and affirm your authority. But authority by itself is not enough. Refocusing the conversation on the fiduciary outcome instead of threat vectors and vulnerability landscape will improve your credibility as well. So I hope we are together on that. So your brand personality needs to insist through your actions, communications, demeanor that you are all about de-risking the organization, and that trail your blaze is designed to accommodate their needs and not yours. So you should always have the interest of the company at hand. Don't just be throwing technical jargons around. Have the strategy of the business in mind also, as the strategy of the business is what will drive the cybersecurity strategy of any organization. The other thing is cyber risk, not cybersecurity, and also you should calculate the risk calculus. So when presenting your case to the board, you should always have cyber risk in mind, not cyber security. I know it's very tempting, especially us from the tech side. It's very tempting for you to put across the point using very many technical things that the board might not understand. Have this in mind that the board is the driver or overseer of the business strategy. So the audience is used to making risk decisions based on financial impact of the business. Like now, for instance, if you tell them, if we are exposed as a company and we, in one way or another, our customer data is accessed by a customer, for instance, and they're not supposed to access that data, we might be fined, let's say, $10 million. You see, if you put across that point in that way, now the board will say, this thing is actually worth investing into, as it's a risk to my company, as it might decrease my profit, it might have a detrimental value to my company brand. So your audience does not know what to do with risk decision that begins with a thesis. This is characterized by low, medium, and high, tied to probability events, but the audience does know what to do with a case study that involves an incident that occur due to not taking appropriate measures on a similar issue. So while doing your research, you should also have a case study of a similar event that occurred and the repercussions that it took. There are so many events that have occurred recently and in the past of cybersecurity breaches and the impact that it had to organizations or businesses. So it would be wise if you came with such a case study to present to the board. So the other thing you should give the board the permission to decide. So once you've presented the case, you've come up with a case study that has the financial implications that has been had, you should give the board the permission to decide. So the story that you've given them uses terms that the board and the C-level buyers can understand and relate to. So from the case study that you have presented, they will be able to see the value in actually investing in the system or in the software that you want to acquire. So in addition, the story will also strike to important emotional drivers. That is one, fear and safety. So when you present the case, and the board will see the need, as they can see that this is something that has actually happened, and these are the consequences of what happened when, for instance, this network access control tool was not bought and customer data was able to be accessed from an external party. The other thing is always have context. Give the board context and always a business perspective. When you're thinking about your story, keep in mind your audience context. Delivering a technical view of cyber risk will completely confuse the business-centric board. So you should always wear your business hat while presenting the case to your board. You should start your pitch by introducing risk from the business perspective, e.g., we hold very confidential medical records and unauthorized access of them could have financial implication. It is critical that we separate the two networks immediately. So when you start with that rationale, it's more likely than not the board is more likely to listen to you, as they can see, they can contextualize the risk that is at hand, and they can contextualize the impact that will occur if the risk is actually actualized. So the other thing the CISO should do while presenting cybersecurity to the board is to teach and to lead. Remember, you're the technical quote-unquote person here. You're the person who's tasked with providing direction on matters cybersecurity in any organization or business. So as the CISO, your job is to guide the board to recognize and acknowledge the realities of today's threat landscape. So they need to understand, they need to separate the two networks. So you should explain to them, and they need to separate what is accessible from the internal network and what is accessible from what we are giving our customers. So teaching your board about these threats and the associated risk provides them useful insight to better govern the organization and further publishes your credentials as a proactive and helpful member of the team. So don't you ever forget that the work of the CISO is to provide direction on matters cybersecurity. So you should always give the board an understanding of why you want, for instance, to acquire a network access control tool. You know that is a cost, and more often than not, the cybersecurity team is always looked at as a cost center. So you should always aim to teach the board on why you require a certain tool or a certain software. So the other thing is to have a framework in which you are basing your case on. So most CISOs are comfortable with frameworks, which is good because we are suggesting one that will work effectively for your board communication. So if your presentations are framed within a model of cyber risk that is familiar to your board, they will have a much better chance of being heard. This model structures 4 attributes of cyber risk, which an attacker is at its core. So what is the probability that someone using the public Wi-Fi that we have provided for them will be able to access the customer's records? So susceptibility, what is susceptibility to that risk? Are we susceptible to that risk? Severity, what is the impact if the risk actually occurs? In urgency, how fast do we need to actually actualize this network access control tool? So while presenting your case to the board, you should keep in mind these 4 aspects: the probability that it will actually occur, how susceptible are we to this actual risk, and how severe will it be if this risk is actually actualized, and how urgent is it for us to incur the cost to, for instance, like in our case study, acquire the network access control tool. The other thing is always have the business objectives in mind. This debate we always have: should the business strategy drive the cybersecurity strategy, or should the cybersecurity strategy drive the business strategy? From my own assessment, I think we should all look at the business strategy, and it is what should drive the cybersecurity strategy. So technology may be where a cyber threat begins and how it will be mitigated, but the business impact is what matters. So at the end of the day, as much as we are technical people, the business strategy should be what that should be guiding us. So if, for instance, we want to be PCI DSS compliant and we still have this risk in our environment, there is no way that this business objective can be met. So while presenting the case to the board, you should also have in mind the business objective and the business strategy. So where is the business heading? Is acquisition of this tool going to also drive the business strategy? So as you address each audience, you might tailor your story to integrate their business objectives. So if you're talking to the board, for instance, you should always have what are the board expecting from the business. If you're talking to management about what you're trying to acquire, you should always have the objectives of the management for the business in mind while presenting your case. The other thing is the conclusion. So moving away from your possession is just a cost center who is constantly getting in the way of progress is actually easier than it sounds. So more often than not, in many organizations, you will find that cybersecurity teams are always viewed as cost centers or no departments. So we should always strive to move away from that perception in any business. So it starts with your ability to begin framing cybersecurity challenges in a cyber risk context in line with business objectives. So when you are able to measurably impact the business through helping your organization define its risk appetite and by identifying alternate paths to mitigate risk in a language and models that are understandable to your board and the entire C-suite, you will finally be seen as a certified and participating peer member of the executive tribe. So I think it's high time that people or organization turn around the notion that they have that cybersecurity teams are always cost centers and they are always derailing the business or strategy or the business objectives. So when you put across your point as mitigating the risks that occur in the business and also driving the business strategy, I think we will turn around and we will have an effective way of communicating cybersecurity to the board. So thank you for your time. I hope it was an informative session. So you can always reach me on LinkedIn through my LinkedIn handle, which is Emily Muraguri. So thank you and have a good day. I hope you learn a lot from this training. Thank you.